Greetings everyone, my name is Jeff Woolsey and it's a pleasure to be here to talk about Windows Server on Azure Innovations. Let's get right into it. Now since we are talking about Windows Server, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the 25 years of innovation that we've had with Windows Server. If you look back at Windows Server, it's something that has evolved over time. In fact, the very first version of Windows Server, Windows NT, was about providing a solid server that it was designed for the masses, for workgroups and branch offices. We then expanded to enterprise and data center scale, and eventually hyperscale and cloud scale. And if you look, Windows Server 2016 added more security and efficiency to on-premises IT systems. And if you look at Windows Server 2019, it continues to strengthen capabilities that help our customers operate hybrid seamlessly. And what's next? Well, quite honestly, it's hybrid everywhere. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about is, of course, the management of Windows Server. Over the years, it's changed as Windows Server has changed, as we've added new roles and features. So you're probably used to a lot of these tools, whether it's Task Manager, Resource Monitor, Performance Monitor, System Information, Device Manager, Event Viewer, Windows Update, of course Explorer, and Hyper-V Manager or Server Manager. And you can see that we've added more as the operating system has molded and taken shape to enable new scenarios that you strongly desire. And of course, this is what it looks like if you're using Windows Server with the GUI experience, the graphical user interface. And of course, here's Windows Server Core. This is the preferred way to deploy Windows Server, where you manage your system remotely. Of course, it can be a little daunting if all you're seeing from a server is a command line prompt. Well, if you're managing Windows Server, if you're using the GUI on the left-hand side, starting with 2012 and all the way through 2019, that's what management looked like. And if you're using Server Core, well, then you've got a command prompt. But you can see these are two very different management environments. This is before we introduced Windows Admin Center. In Windows Admin Center, the fantastic thing about it is, whether you're running Windows Server with the full graphical user interface or you're managing Server Core, Windows Admin Center provides an integrated, modernized, and simplified experience. It's all done from a browser window, and in fact provides a bunch of tools built in. And it doesn't matter whether you're managing Windows Server or Server Core, because you're doing it remotely in an easy-to-use browser experience. It allows you to streamline everyday tasks. And of course, it also allows you to connect to Windows Server anywhere. So if Windows Server is running in Azure IaaS, if it's running on premises, if it's running on a physical machine, if it's running on a virtual machine, whether it's VMware or Hyper-V, or it doesn't matter. Windows Admin Center allows you to simplify your management, streamline your everyday tasks, and as long as you can connect to Windows Server anywhere, guess what? Windows Admin Center can help you manage. And in fact, the response to Windows Admin Center has really truly been off the charts. It's been out just over 2 years, and we literally have millions and millions of servers under management every month. We have been so overwhelmed by the response to Windows Admin Center. Customers love it. And when I say customers love it, I mean all shapes and sizes. I've spoken to small customers who say, you know what, Jeff, I've just got a couple of servers here in my small branch office location, and Admin Center is great for that. I've also spoken to customers on the opposite end of the spectrum, customers that are running large enterprises and large organizations and tell me, yeah, we use Windows Admin Center, it's clustered, and we're actually managing over 25,000 servers with Windows Admin Center. And of course, the cost of this, well, the cost of this is nothing. It's already part of, it's a free license, so you can download it and you can use it to manage your Windows Server instances everywhere. Well, it's gotten so popular, and people are using this, of course, to manage their Windows servers running anywhere. We've actually got a very common refrain. And in fact, we know that we can do more, and we want to do a lot more. Here's a typical comment that we hear about Windows Admin Center. Jeff, hybrid cloud is our strategy. We've migrated numerous apps to Azure. Exchange and SharePoint, well, they're already migrated to Microsoft 365. Our on-premises Active Directory is synced to Azure Active Directory. We're adopting containers, and there are several apps that will need to run in VMs for the foreseeable future. Pretty common. We would love to see Admin Center in Azure to manage our Windows Server in Azure IaaS. Well, you know what? That's a great idea. You got it. So I'm thrilled to announce that Windows Admin Center is now available in Azure. That's right, your favorite server management tool is available natively through the Azure portal. You can now manage your Azure IaaS VMs, and of course you get granular management, configuration, troubleshooting, and maintenance functionality. Now this is for Windows Server 2016 and later, 2016 and 2019. This is included with Azure IaaS. It's no additional cost. It's always up to date. We'll do that for you with the latest and new features, and it's covered by Azure support. This is now available in private preview at aka.ms/WAC for Windows Admin Center in portal signup. And with that, it's demo time. Enough talk. Let's get right to it. So if you've never seen Windows Admin Center, I'm going to give you a quick tour. Now currently this is Windows Admin Center, and this is the main screen, and this is managing some on-premises servers. You can see I have clusters and I have servers here. If I wanted to add a new server, I simply click on the add button, put in the fully qualified domain name of my servers, my clusters, and I can easily connect. I can even create Azure VMs and connect to Azure VMs. But for the moment, we're just going to talk about my on-premises servers. I'm going to go ahead and choose this server right here, and I'm going to connect to it. And you can see right off the bat, I can see an overview of this server. I can see its name, I can see its disk space, I can see its domain, its operating system version, the amount of memory, the model. All of this information is readily available. You'll notice I'm also getting an update of CPU, networking, and memory usage in real time. So in the traditional world, you could think of this as Task Manager, System Properties, and many more things, except here it is all in one screen in the overview. On the left-hand side, you'll see all of these different tools. Each one of these is actually a plugin. In fact, when Windows Admin Center was first introduced a few years ago, there was mainly about 6 to 8 tools here when we started. Well, we've done so much development and continue to do more development on Admin Center that we have so many that we need a scroll bar. And I could spend pretty much the next hour just talking about that. But I only have a little bit of time, so let me show you just a few things. Number one, with Windows Admin Center, of course, I have Azure hybrid capabilities, so I can connect to those. But in terms of managing my local servers, you can see I have a lot of things that are really important to me. For example, if I want to view the status of the certificates on the server. You know, how many of you have ever had a certificate expire and that caused problems? Well, here's a quick and easy way to check. Here are the ones that are nearly expired. All I have to do is click on that, and I can sort it by name, by the expiration date. You can see what the dates are here very quickly and very easily. And you'll notice I'm doing all of this from a browser window. I'm actually not RDP'd into the server. This is running on my Windows 10 laptop. Now, if I wanted to do something like, for example, take a look at things like events. Events are actually very important to me. If I wanted to look at application logs, security logs, system logs, I can do all of that. And by the way, the server that I'm managing, you don't know if it's running full server with the desktop or server core. That's okay, because Windows Admin Center is managing them exactly the same. And if I wanted to manipulate files, firewall, see my installed apps, I can do all of those things. If I wanted to actually enable roles and features, look at scheduled tasks, see running services, again, I can do all of this very quickly and easily here. One really cool feature about Windows Admin Center is people asked us when we first launched Windows Admin Center, how are you connecting to these servers? Well, it's actually PowerShell and WMI. And one of the first requests we got was, well, you know what, Jeff, it'd be really great if we could actually see the PowerShell. And so we actually put a PowerShell button right here so that you can literally see all of the PowerShell we're using in Windows Admin Center. And I can do something like simply copy this and paste this into my own scripts. So this powerful capability is built into Windows Admin Center. And you can see there's so much to love here. And again, we keep adding more and more features. By the way, quick to point out as well, all of our new features for the UI, for management of Windows Server, are all happening in Windows Admin Center. You're not going to see any new GUI come to Windows Server, and that's on purpose. For example, we've introduced new features in Windows Server 2019, like the storage migration service. This allows you to migrate servers from your old file servers to Windows Server 2016 and 2019, and the UI is all included here. We also introduced a new feature called System Insights. And again, that capability is built into Windows Server, but the UI is all delivered in here in System Insights. And all I have to do is click install and get right to it. All right, well, again, I could spend lots of time showing you Windows Admin Center. And again, it's a super powerful tool. But one of the things I want to show you is, of course, the fact that it's now available in Azure. So now I'm switching to a new tab, and now I'm going to show you everything I'm about to show you is running in Azure. So if I wanted to look at my Azure services, whether they're VMs, resource groups, again, this is just the Azure portal. Well, I've already created a virtual machine. It's a Human Resources VM HR70. And so you can see this is a standard virtual machine. It's got, I can see the resource group, the status, where it's running, and all of that. I can see the virtual machine. I can see it's monitoring its capabilities, the OS it's running, and things like that. These are all standard Azure IaaS things. If I wanted to come into access control, for example, to enable role-based access control and add people or deny people access to the server, I can do that. If I want to do things like applying tags, for example, this is an HR system, so I gave it the tag of organization tag of human resources. If I wanted to, for example, add the type of environment that it's running in. So for example, this I forgot to mention, this is actually a pre-production environment. So I'm going to go ahead and add that and apply that. So now I've applied this tag in here. And so you can see all of these really cool things here in Azure to manage my Windows Server VM. However, there's a couple things that it doesn't do. For example, if I actually want to go inside the VM and configure and add a role or add a feature, or if I actually want to look at some of the things within the VM, if I want to actually connect to it, I can do that. I can click on connect and download an RDP file. But we've had a lot of people request the ability to actually be able to get an RDP session within the browser window. Well, guess what, folks? This is where Windows Admin Center comes into play. So again, I showed you Windows Admin Center running on premises. Well, here's Windows Admin Center running in Azure. So now I'm simply going to connect to Windows Admin Center. Now, the first time you do this, it may take, it'll take a minute or so for everything to be configured, which I've already done. As you can see, I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And so now I have Windows Admin Center enabled, and lo and behold, I'm still in Azure. This may look like I'm running on premises. It looks just like Windows Admin Center, except this is actually running in Azure. And again, on the overview page, I can see CPU, memory, networking, and more. Like I showed you before, if I want to look at certificates, for example, expired or nearly expired, again, this is a VM running on Azure IaaS. So I'm already familiar with Windows Admin Center running on premises. Well, guess what? Now I'm using my same favorite tool within Azure. So for example, if I want to go into events, and a very common thing is to look at something like security events. So you can see here I've got, over 25,000 items. Now normally this would be a little concerning, but I'm going to go here into the filter button, and I don't want to see any of the informational or the verbose. I want to see critical errors. I'm going to apply a filter, and in fact you can see, actually I've got nothing to worry about. There's 0 items. I'm going to go ahead and clear that filter. If I wanted to actually look at the file system, for example, I can come over here, I can take a look at the C drive. You can see I created a folder called temp earlier. I don't need it, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I don't need that anymore. If I needed to create a new folder, well, guess what? I'll go ahead and create a new folder. Type in new. And by the way, there's our folder. And if I need to share this with anybody, guess what? I can just come in here into share and do that. And again, all of this is in Windows Admin Center. Now again, one of the features most requested is folks want the ability from the Azure portal to actually connect to the running instance without having to download an RDP file and running a local RDP session. What they really want is, in fact, they want an embedded RDP session. Well, in fact, folks, that's exactly what we're doing here with Windows Admin Center. So now I've typed in my name and my credentials, and guess what, folks? Here is that virtual machine. This is all running in Azure IaaS, and guess what? I have full RDP access. So if I want to come in here and actually need to look at something specific, or actually want to do something specific in the machine and actually look at a specific app, that's all readily available. So this is Windows Admin Center. It's in preview right now here in the Azure portal. So that is Windows Admin Center, a great tool for managing your Windows servers running on premises and in Azure. However, we want to take management even further in Azure. We want to make Azure the best place for Windows Server. In fact, we can do more. And with that, let me pass it to my friend, Dean Wells. Dean, all yours.
Why, thank you, Jeff, me old mate. Hello, everybody. My name is Dean Wells. I'm a program manager in the Azure Compute team, and today I'm proud to talk to you about something I've been working on for a long time now, Azure Auto Manage for virtual machines. So before I explain to you exactly what it is, let me explain to you why we decided to build it. So we've surveyed a large number of customers like yourselves, and we've asked them, what exactly is your perception of the cloud? The message we got back was they found that they realistically need to build new specialized teams. So you end up with one team managing stuff on premises and a second team with the skill set to manage stuff in the cloud. These teams tend to diversify, creating islands of management expertise. And even with a dedicated team, it's still hard to keep up with the pace of change and the new updated services and offerings, and as features get enhanced, it's tough even for that dedicated team to maintain pace with that. Everyone echoes the same thing. SaaS is indeed the dream scenario, and it's the destination for most workloads. Lots and lots of folks jumped on the bandwagon, and they replaced Microsoft Exchange with what is now referred to as Microsoft 365, and that was a fantastic realization of the cloud itself. However, things like mission-critical line of business applications, they still remain a challenge. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about traditional workloads, the way in which you ran them in a traditional on-premises scenario. In these scenarios, we're finding out that very few customers have attempted to refactor it to PaaS. By PaaS, I mean platform as a service, where we've got that cloud API and you can rewrite an application, and hopefully it will run more efficiently, it will be more elastic in terms of its scale, and the resulting application should be far simpler than the original one on premises. Most folks aren't doing this because they don't own the source code in many cases, or they simply lack the expertise. There was another argument that we received a great deal, which is, well, why fix what ain't broken? The application works just fine. So they claimed there was no motivation to move to the cloud. Perhaps you understand and agree with that particular conclusion. So the general takeaway is that the cloud offers very limited values for these IaaS or infrastructure as a service scenarios, especially so when compared to SaaS. So the question we came back and asked ourselves is, if Azure offers infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, what exactly is it that we're missing to make Azure a better place to run these traditional workloads? The answer comes back as something that we originally coined as, operating system as a service. We decided that wasn't a good name, but it is a good description. So the goal of Azure Auto Manage is to replace repetitive day-to-day operational tasks with this exception-only management model, where if that VM is healthy, and we believe they are 90+% of the time, it will become a hands-free experience, an exception-only management model. At a high level, there are three things that we're really targeting. We want to be able to reduce the cost. That is the operational expense, that human labor burden. We want to be able to improve workload uptime with optimized operations, i.e. you don't have to worry about discovering a new service in Azure, you don't have to worry about onboarding to that service, and you don't have to worry about configuring it. We handle that for you. And the same will be true of the operational aspects for security and compliance. For example, we will automatically onboard you to Azure Security Center and Azure Anti-Malware. And those aspects of security and compliance will now become things that we take care of for you. So the first feature under Azure Auto Manage is Azure Virtual Machine Best Practices. The goal of this service is to intelligently onboard you to a set of services that combined is the Azure Best Practice for running a VM. As a public preview, we're onboarding you to 12 or 13 different services. By the time we're done at general availability, that should be up at around 21 different services. Obviously, if your machine drifts from that state, we'll automatically remediate it. If you want to ensure your VMs conform to Azure best practices today, you can do so. There is a white paper in our Cloud Adoption Framework. There is a link on screen for you to go to if you'd like to take a look at it. Easy enough. Well, what I'd like to do is show you how much easier that can be using Auto Manage for virtual machines. So let's go ahead and give you a demo. So here you can see we've typed in Auto Manage into the search bar and it's returned the Auto Manage for Virtual Machines service. So I click on Enable Existing VM, I select VM1, I then hit Enable. Job done. It really is as simple as point, click, set and forget it. So let me show you a similar scenario, but this time we'll walk through each of the options available to us so you understand where it is you have the flexibility to configure Azure Virtual Machine best practices. So here we are in the portal. It's a little bit further down the line now. Perhaps we've been running it for 3 or 4 days, so we've got some 7 or 8 machines already enabled. So again, I'll follow the same path. I click on Enable on existing VM, and I select the additional machines that I would like to have added. So for the sake of argument, I will choose VMs 6 and 7. I click on Select. Next, I'm going to browse and change profiles and preferences. This is where we have the opportunity to choose 1, which configuration profile we're going to use, and 2, to override some of those onboarding configuration preferences. So firstly, let's take a look at the 2 configuration profiles that are available today. We have one called Azure Virtual Machine Best Practices Production and another called Dev Test. The reason for this distinction is, if we take a look at the production configuration profile, you'll notice that it automatically onboards you to Azure Backup. If, however, I click on Dev Test, you'll notice that Backup, among others, disappears from the list of onboarded services. The reason for this is dev test machines don't typically run production workloads, so they're either classified as low business impact or no business impact. Hence, is it really worth incurring the expense to maintain backups of them, especially given that their life cycle may be as quick as a day or even faster? So let me go back to production and I'll show you what happens if you expand these. I can, for example, click on Backup, and it will give me a summary of precisely how it's going to onboard me to the backup service. If this is insufficient for my needs, I can simply click on Create New Preferences. The purpose of configuration profile preferences is to allow you to override the configuration defaults for a service that we would otherwise automatically onboard you to with our own internal defaults. So let's go ahead and give this a name, and I'll simply call it Dean-Preference. And then I'll configure the particular preferences I'm interested in. Let's say, for example, I would rather the backup frequency of this machine happen weekly. I would prefer that happened on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. At which point, I'm effectively done. I can now click on Review and Create. Job done. We now have a new configuration preference. I now click on Select, and basically I've onboarded those 2 machines we selected earlier to auto-manage virtual machine best practices using the production configuration profiles with a preference override contained in that resource named Dean-Preference. Last but not least on this screen, you see this advanced control here. If we expand that, you'll notice it refers to something called an auto-manage account. The auto-manage account, using a technical description, is the security context under which we perform the operations for you. Stated another way, it is the Azure Active Directory system managed service identity that is used to perform those automated operations. We automatically create the auto-managed account for you so that you don't have to worry about it. However, you also have the option to create your own. You would create an additional auto-managed account in scenarios where you need perhaps a separation of duty. Let's take the scenario we have 2 administrators. They each manage 100 different virtual machines. Typically, they've been managing them by hand. They decide to use auto-manage for virtual machines and the virtual machines best practices service. So we would like to ensure that when the auto-managed service manages some aspect of one administrator's virtual machines, that we can distinguish which one it was doing it for. The auto-managed account would be visible in the audit trail, so you could determine whose auto-managed account was administering that particular set of virtual machines. All I need to do now is go ahead and click on Enable, and job done. And while hardly surprising, we also allow you to enable Azure Auto Manage for virtual machines directly from the VM Create experience. So let's go ahead and finish this creation flow. Everything there looks good to me, so I click on Create. Obviously this takes a few minutes, so in the classic cookery show fashion, here's one that we baked a little bit earlier on. So you can see here that the deployment is complete. All I now need to do is click on Enable Azure Virtual Machine Best Practices. I'll click that button. It takes me to the same experience you had when enabling Azure Virtual Machine Best Practices on an existing VM. In my case, the configuration profile that's been defaulted is the production one. That's precisely what I want. It's worth a mention, though, that there's some intelligence behind this default selection. What we basically do is we take a look at the services the machine was already set up to be onboarded to, such as Azure Backup, which you can select earlier on in the Create experience. As a result, we inferred from that that this was a production virtual machine. Hence, we chose the production configuration profile. So the only thing I need to do here is click on Enable, at which point it returns me to the end of the virtual machine creation flow. You can see at the top the configuration profile has been assigned. Let's go and see that in some detail. And there we are. It is possible for a virtual machine to fail onboarding to Azure Virtual Machine Best Practices, or even to fail after it had successfully onboarded due to some configuration change that for some reason or other we were unable to remediate. When that does occur, it will appear in the grid view here as a failed virtual machine. It may be beneficial at this point for you to disable auto management while you attempt to root cause the problem. So all we need to do there is click on the virtual machine, click on Disable Auto Management. Now let's review the resulting behaviors closely. The first thing, we are not going to offboard it or unconfigure it. We are going to leave it in the position that it's currently in. We don't want to make things worse by undoing configurations and taking it out of the state that it was in where the error occurred. 2. As a result of that, charges may continue to be incurred, so please make sure you offboard it from any of the services that are no longer relevant. And last but not least, any of the auto-managed behaviors will stop immediately, i.e. we will no longer be attempting to remediate it and drag it back into conformance. So all that's left for me to do now is click on Disable, at which point I get confirmation at the top that auto management was indeed disabled, and we're done. Lastly, and certainly by no means least, let me show you how you can use Azure Policy to onboard virtual machines that already exist at scale, or how you can put policies in place so that new virtual machines that fall within the scope of the policy are automatically onboarded to Azure Virtual Machine Best Practices. So first things first, here we are in the Azure Policy Blade, and we're looking at the definitions. The categories here will allow me to filter this view down to something more manageable, so let's do that. I'll select all off and we'll take a look at auto manage virtual machines only. So let's go ahead and click on it. The first thing that we're going to need to do is assign it. So we click on Assign, and now let's go into our little ellipsis here. So we're going to scope this Azure policy to virtual machines that exist in the Contoso subscription and that fall into the resource group Contoso Resource Group. Let's go ahead and select that. Next, we need to look at the parameters. So let's go ahead and click on parameters. Obviously, we're going to need to specify what the auto manage account is and what configuration profile we should be onboarding these virtual machines that fall into that resource group within the Contoso subscription. So first things first, let's drop down the auto manage account, and you can see here that we've got West US IT auto manage account, clearly one that we created manually for our own purposes. Next, I need to select the configuration profile. Well, in fact, this configuration profile is perfect for my needs. It's the production config profile, so we're good to go with that one. So all I need to do now is click on Review and Create. Now let's click on Create to ensure that that's done. Perfect. You can see at the top here that the policy assignment was indeed created successfully. Next, we need to take a look at the assignments, just to verify the fact that this policy is indeed going to take effect on the virtual machines within the subscription and within the correct resource group scopes that I'm interested in. And as you can see here, it is indeed going to be applied to any virtual machine in the Contoso subscription that exists in any of these 4 resource groups. So that about wraps it up for the demonstrations. Let's go ahead and review what we've learned. Azure Auto Manage Virtual Machine Best Practices is designed to create a new management model, a new management paradigm, if you will, for Windows Server virtual machines running in Azure. The goal is to turn it into an exception-only management model. What this means is we've replaced the day-to-day OpEx burden of managing Windows Server virtual machines running in Azure. You no longer need to monitor to ensure that they're conformant with Azure best practices. You no longer need to ensure that they are correctly onboarded to Azure Security Center or Update Management or Azure Backup or Azure Site Recovery. Azure Auto Manage takes care of all of those tasks for you. We also intelligently onboard you to those services from a day zero experience with brand new VMs, and we can do the same for existing VMs. In addition, we automatically configure each service per that service's own Azure best practices, and you can find those best practices in the white paper that we linked to earlier on in the Cloud Adoption Framework. Further, it configures the guest operating system per Microsoft's baseline configuration, and these baselines are OS specific, and obviously we choose the appropriate version. We also automatically detect for drift. What this means is if the machine is no longer conformant with the configuration profile you've assigned to it, we will detect that and pull it back into conformance. Last but not least, we designed a number of onboarding experiences. The first one in the portal is designed to be point and click simple. You can enable auto manage for virtual machines in the create experience, and you can also do so for existing virtual machines. In addition, we also provide a built-in Azure policy. The built-in Azure policy can be used to extend Azure Auto Manage to a large number of virtual machines in at-scale environments, or you can configure the policy definition such that as new virtual machines are created, we will automatically assign a configuration profile to that new virtual machine, and then within just a few minutes, we will bring it into conformance with Azure best practices for both production and dev test scenarios. So that's everything that I had. So if you'd like to get started with Azure Auto Manage, please feel free to browse to aka.ms/automanage preview. If you're interested in digging into the weeds a little bit, how this thing is implemented and how you might leverage it in the future, please feel free to go and have a look at any of those links beneath the Learn More section. Thank you very much for listening.